Hi guys, Mr. Talbot here for you. We're going to be going into our fourth unit, and the fourth unit covers a lot of really broad topics that we're going to touch on a little bit. We're going to start with probably the biggest topic, and that's the Industrial Revolution. And the reason I say it's the biggest is this is going to change everything. When we think about the history of the world, if we go back to the very, very beginning of the course, we talked a little bit about the Paleolithic era into the Neolithic era, where people started farming, and that led to bigger cities and civilizations. That's considered the first big turning point in world history. And to a lot of historians, this is the other big turning point in world history. Really, the modern world you think of and enjoy in a lot of ways stems back to this Industrial Revolution. So we're kind of talking the years 1750 to the early 1900s, so about 150, 175 years, give or take a little bit, kind of depending on the country you're in. If you're in England or the United States where it began, it takes a little bit longer. The later countries are able to do it quicker because they're able to borrow and steal some of the ideas. What do we mean by the Industrial Revolution as we're taking notes and using our study guide on this? So we're going from an agrarian or farming-based economy to one where people make stuff by hand to one where industry and manufacturing dominate. This is not to say that farming goes away. After all, people still have to eat. What we're going to see is that we need fewer farmers to produce more food. This is going to allow workers to go into more specialized fields, you know, just working in their specific manufacturing thing or whatever. And that's going to kind of lead to what we see in the economy nowadays. Begins in Great Britain, or what we commonly call England. It's going to spread then to the United States, Western Europe, and then, as we see today, almost the entire world would be considered part of the industrialized world. So why does it take place during this time? We always want to kind of set the scene in world history with why is it taking place? So a few things have happened. We've got the scientific revolution, and if you're going to have new technology, that's going to come from having, the idea of experimenting, trying to improve things, trying to make progress. Additionally, with that, the spreading of ideas through things. We've even moved beyond the printing press, which is faster and faster communication, more and more people communicating. We've got freer societies that are going to do more to protect private property and businesses. That's thanks to the Enlightenment. If you think about before the Enlightenment, you had absolute monarchs that could just kind of take away your property or whatever, or just tax you however they wanted. As we get in the freer societies, that's going to open up for the freedom of ideas and the freedom of innovation. So that's the other thing that's happening. All that's great. The other thing that you're going to need though is some money to invest, and thanks to the Columbian Exchange, you've got a bigger, economy. The whole world's involved in the economy now. That means you got more markets to sell to, more places to get goods from, and that's going to lead to just overall more money that you can invest. So that's the next little, ingredient we're throwing in. And then we talked about the improvements in agriculture. More food produced through a variety of innovations you don't need to worry about, and that's less farmers that are needed. More food means more people, and so we have a growing population and a smaller chunk of that population needed to farm. They can go now work in different stuff. So, what are the consequences going to be? And again, consequence doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. We're going to see more people moving to cities. We call that urbanization. We're eventually going to see an increase in standard of living. That means the amount of money people have, what they can buy with the money, things they can do with the money. That's going to get better over time. So people are becoming richer. Eventually, people are going to be living longer. In the short term, we're going to see the opposite. We also see pollution and kind of the exploitation of the environment. The idea of consumerism, where we really value ourselves based a lot of times on the products we can purchase. And it's a big part of our culture. Positive and negative costs there. We're going to go specifically into some big societal changes and some political and economic changes later on in this video, as well as in our next video. We're going to kind of divide this topic up into two videos because it's a really, really big idea. So we're not going to get into the whole details of it. The short term of it, if you were living in the early phase of the Industrial Revolution, it sucked. Unless you were a rich person, and which you probably weren't, you're going to be probably working no longer on a farm. You might have even lost your job on a farm because with the new technology, they don't need as many workers. So you're going to go to the cities looking for work. You're going to get a job in a factory. This is whether you're a man or a woman, and or even if you're a kid. You're probably going to be doing the same job over and over. We've got now kind of manufacturing is getting more precise, and we can have what are called interchangeable parts, where we have this in everything nowadays. Before, again, everything's kind of made by hand. Everything's a little bit unique. Now everything can kind of get swapped in and out. So now you can have these assembly lines, which is great for productivity. It's awful if you're the assembly line worker and you're doing the same thing over and over and over, day after day after day. Um, Throw on top of that, the conditions are, dirty, the pay is low, and the conditions are also unsafe. If that's not bad enough, if you get hurt on the job or you get too sick to go to work, you're just going to get fired or you're not going to get paid. There's no unemployment insurance. There's nothing to protect you. Your hours are incredibly long. You're talking 14 plus hours a day. And the only break being for lunch. There's no just, oh, it's the end of the hour, take a five. Nuh-uh. You're working all day except for maybe 30 minutes to an hour off for lunch, and that's it. Um, as crazy as this sounds, this was in some ways an improvement. The low wages were actually still better than what was going on in a lot of the farming world, um, but it's still really bad. And again, it's kind of the only work available, and a lot of kids are going into working in factories, so we don't have widespread public education yet or anything like that. So here's kind of some images, and I always think about this one again, that assembly line doing the same thing day after day. Um, you can kind of see an older person doing the same job behind. Factory owners would use kids because they were cheaper, they had smaller hands and could get into some of the machinery easier. And if the factory owner hired the kid, they also usually were hiring the parents. And this really takes away the leverage from those workers because if the workers start, complaining, not only is the dad going to lose his job, the mom's going to lose their job, and the kids are going to lose their job, and you're going to be pretty much destitute and, impoverished. And this is a time before we have a lot of social things like food stamps or unemployment, so those kind of things. All right, so that's all awful. Let's talk about some positive changes. We do see a rising middle class. And this middle class happens because there's more money in the economy. So you're going to have those kind of managers of the factory. They're going to get paid a little bit more. You're also going to have more people buying stuff, so more merchants and kind of shop owners. That's going to be an increase in middle class, and so that's a good thing. And we're going to see some of those middle class people were left out of the political process. They couldn't vote for their leadership. So they're going to be pushing, and first they're going to get the right to vote. We're going to see working class people are going to organize into labor unions and push for better conditions, and they're going to get it. And they're going to also eventually get the vote as well. So for men, you're going to see an expansion of voting. Up to this time, a lot of times you had to be rich, particularly in England, but still so much of that state in the United States to vote. Women, your working class women are, working in the factories, but there is this new middle class group of women, and they're going to have new chances to go to college and get more formal education. And that's going to be what's going to help spark that first wave of feminism, which is going to help push for things like the vote. So again, so there's a lot of positive changes that come here. We've got urbanization we're going to touch on in a second. Again, essentially these cities grow so fast because so many people are first off being born, but they're also having to move away from the lost farming jobs. There's some immigration going on from places like Ireland, and in the case of the United States, from Ireland and other parts of Europe, all moving to these cities at the same time. So the cities are just really growing really fast. The city governments can't keep up with it. There's a shortage of housing. There's public crime that's going up. There's pollution. There's huge issues with sewage. Again, you don't want to be living in the early phase of the Industrial Revolution. Later phase, things get a lot better. Not so much in the beginning. So let's talk about what's going on as these cities are growing faster and faster. Again, the rural population, those old farmers are moving to the city to get these new factory jobs. You're going to be looking at these really crowded, what are called tenements, essentially crummy apartments that, just 20 people might be sharing an apartment. Um, so this kind of, they get run down really, really fast and something. They were really never great to begin with. They were kind of, thrown up really quickly. And the city governments essentially gave up on trying to fix it. So they're going to stop regulating crime there. So crime's going to keep going up. They're going to not deal with the pollution, so it keeps getting dirtier. They're not going to deal with sanitation, so people keep getting sick. And you're going to have these fires and all these issues. And the really sad thing was the government officials at this time tend to be from that middle class and upper class. And they're going to blame the poor people for it. Say, oh, the poor people, there's just something wrong with them. In the United States, you get some racism mixed in there with it. But there's, in cross societies, this middle and particularly upper class looking down on the poor, saying there's something wrong with them. not recognizing that they were kind of failing this group of people. Eventually, we see reform, so we're going to see more modern fire departments and police departments, more professionalized. And a lot of those people are going to be able to rise up into the middle class, which is good. We're going to see child labor is going to be outlawed eventually. It takes a while, like 1930s kind of a while. We're going to see with that, there's going to come public education, and we're going to see improvements in sanitation. So all some good positive changes there. In our next video, we're going to talk about the economic changes, but I just kind of want to finish off with our little summary here. In the early Industrial Revolution, we have a lot of challenges, a lot of not good stuff. The cities are growing too fast to keep them nice. We're polluting the heck out of the environment. We're extracting raw materials at an unsustainable rate. We're polluting rivers so badly that they're literally catching on fire because there is no regulation on this. We've got child labor. We've got low wages, unsafe conditions, no social safety net. Life expectancy is actually going down into like the age of like 28 in some of these cities. Really low life expectancy. This is going to lead to lots of crime and issues like that. But in the long term, people are going to be richer and better off. We're going to have more money available. People are going to be able to do leisure activities like sports and going to the theater and a lot of things we enjoy nowadays. Weekends are going to become a thing that they weren't really before in the agrarian economy. Middle class is going to get bigger. We talked about democracy increasing, especially for your middle class, but later on into the working class men. And then the next step, as we learned about before, is going to be into that first wave of feminism. We're going to leave that here. We're going to touch on economic systems in our next video.